Welcome to everyone. I'm James Jensen, today's webinar chair. I'm a contractor supporting the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs Tribal Energy Webinar Series. Today's webinar, titled Tribal Energy Success Stories, is the 10th and final webinar of the 2020 DOE Tribal Energy Webinar Series. Let's go over some event details. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on DOE's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs website in about 1 week. Copies of today's presentation slides will be posted to the Office of Indian Energy's website shortly after this webinar, if they're not posted there already. Everyone will receive a post-webinar email with the link to the pages where the slides and recording will be located. Because we are recording this webinar, all phones have been muted. We will answer your written questions at the end of the final presentation. You can submit a question at any time by clicking on the question button located in the webinar control box on your screen and typing your question. Let's get started with opening remarks from Lizana Pierce. Ms. Pierce is a senior engineer and deployment supervisor for the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs and is duty stationed in Golden, Colorado. She oversees the deployment program, which is national in scope. Specifically, the deployment program includes financial assistance, technical assistance, and education and outreach. She also implements national funding opportunities and administers some of the resultant tribal energy project grants and agreements. Lizana, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and hello, everyone. I join James in welcoming you to today's webinar. This webinar series is sponsored by the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs, otherwise referred to as the Office of Indian Energy for short. So the Office of Indian Energy directs, fosters, coordinates, and implements energy planning, education, management, and programs that assist tribes with energy development, capacity building, energy infrastructure, installation, reducing energy costs, and electrification of Indian lands and homes. This Tribal Energy webinar series is just one example of our education and capacity building efforts. The webinar series is also part of the Office of Indian Energy's efforts to support fiscally responsible energy business and economic development decision-making and information sharing amongst tribes. In today's webinar, we are focusing on tribal energy success stories, and there are many. The 4 case studies presented today will highlight some unique examples of energy-related activities that tribes have undertaken. Since every tribe has their own unique situation, these examples are not intended necessarily to be roadmaps for other tribes to follow, but to provide examples of the types of activities and projects that are possible. Before we hear about a few tribal energy projects, we are fortunate to have Kevin Frost, Director of the Office of Indian Energy, with us today to share some introductory remarks. Before I turn it over to Director Frost, please give me a moment and give him a brief introduction. Monica, could you advance the slide, please? So Kevin R. Frost is the Director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs. He's duty stationed at DOE headquarters in Washington, D.C. Mr. Frost is responsible for making sure the office complies with its statutory obligations in furtherance of its mission and goals. Prior to working for DOE, Director Frost was a councilman for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe of Colorado, of which he is a member. He worked on a myriad of tribal issues, including energy and natural resource development, rural infrastructure, health, and finance. Mr. Frost has also previously served as delegate to the Indian Country Energy and Infrastructure Working Group, which is a tribal leader advisory group to the Office of Indian Energy. And he has served on the board member of the National Tribal Energy Association. He holds a BS in Conservation Science in the College of Santa Fe and a JD from the University of Denver. Kevin, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Lizana, and also thank you very much, James, and Monica as well, running today's webinar. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules today to take part in this final webinar for calendar year 2020. But I would also like to take at least a couple of extra seconds to thank the entire Office of Indian Energy team from our federal side and our contractor supports all across the country. It it takes an entire team in order to meet the missions, goals, and objectives of the office. And in doing so, I've been fortunate enough to have a really great team to work with. Prior to myself being the director, I was also the deputy director for the office, so really know the ins and outs of the office itself. But in addition to the Indian Energy team as well, I'd also like to thank the planning committee for always meeting on a regular basis to develop these brand new webinars, and then always keeping areas and topics of interest at the forefront so that we can meet any emerging technologies, any energy development issues that may happen, but really to begin establishing a baseline through education and capacity building, not only with this webinar, but also with the past webinars that we've housed and that are also for everyone's perusal on our energy.gov/Indian Energy website, and just basically looking at from what we've seen happen at the beginning of the year in February, starting off with energy efficiency basics, and then looking at some other topics that we've done throughout the year, developing your energy vision. What would you like your tribe's energy future to be? How to select energy projects, and again with some additional webinars that show how to create partnerships to advance tribal energy projects, as well as major project agreements. There's a lot of information that the office distributes, puts out, and makes available to our constituency to make sure that not only are we interacting with our constituency, but making sure that any of those topics are relevant topics that can help any member of our constituency develop those energy development goals that are so critical and crucial in today's time, especially when you put that against the backdrop of what everyone's dealing with around the country and around the world with the impacts of COVID-19. So as we're kind of coursing all through this pandemic together as well, the one thing that the office is also striving to make sure that everyone knows is in times like these, it should also be an opportunity for our constituency to kind of pause and reflect on what they're going through. Where are they getting their power from, their electricity? Where is that power generation coming from? And in the Office of Indian Energy, we really look at it from the perspective of the tribes, the Alaska Native corporations, or the tribal energy development organizations all have the ability to really define what they want their energy vision to be. And by partnering and working with the Office of Indian Energy, the office can assist tribes develop not only some of those goals and plans, but also provide the technical assistance that's required to actually give a deliverable and move a project forward. And that's really the most important part of this office, in addition to the financial assistance that we put out every year through our funding opportunity announcements. And as always, we do have an open funding opportunity announcement, which closes in February. And right now we have a formalized cost share reduction process. So that closes on December 10th. So if there's anybody that's interested in doing a project with our open funding opportunity announcement that would like a cost share reduction, you have until December 10th to get that request in. So there's a lot of great things happening right now with the Office of Indian Energy. And as we kind of see what's happening right now across the tribal landscape with so many tribes looking to express their tribal sovereignty and self-determination, that's really where we do fit in as a true partner with any member of our constituency. And by that, when we work together and we're able to solve these problems together, the real goal of the office is not to do the work for our constituents, but is to assist them as a partner and come in when they need that assistance. But overall, to make sure that when we do interact with members of our constituency, that interaction is a positive interaction, but actually leads to the development of energy across Indian country in general. So with today's webinar, the areas that we're looking at and some of the success stories that we'll hear from Alaska as well as the lower 48. You've heard Lizana say these are just expressions of certain tribes, certain entities as well, with how they envisioned having a successful tribal energy development component. And the most important part about defining success is with 574 tribes and with Alaska Native corporations and tribal energy development organizations, success isn't going to be defined by one tribe or one energy development corporation or energy development organization or one ANC in particular. That's going to be up to each individual to define what they view as success. And as we work towards the future success of tribes and our constituency that want to develop these projects, please, by all means, continue to call upon the office. There are many ways to interact via webinar. We're always looking for potential members for our ICWIG delegates group as well. So there's a lot of other opportunities to interact with the office and to make sure that we are looking at certain types of technologies that might work in your area, or there might be some things that come on the horizon where we're able to leverage not only the other assets of the Department of Energy, but in particular when it comes to technical assistance, this office does have the ability to leverage DOE's crown jewel, all 17 of the national labs, in order to overcome an energy development project at no cost to our constituency. So please keep these things in mind as you're working towards your energy development goals. And just know that back in DC, inside the Beltway, there is an office there that does a lot of honorable and admirable work and will continue to do so presently and in the future as well. So again, please call on us, and it is an honor to speak with everyone today. And I look forward to the questions that are going to be proffered, as well as to the presentations as well. So everyone, thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you, Director Frost, for your comments today and for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Before I turn it back to James, I did want to personally thank all the presenters for giving us their time, not only in preparing for, but in presenting on today's webinar. I'd also like to take the time to thank the Planning Committee for their time in helping us to bring this webinar series to you. And of course, I'd like to thank James for his hard work in making these webinars possible. So thank you all. And with that, I'll turn the virtual floor back over to James. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanna and Director Frost. Before we get to the case study presentations, I will introduce all of today's presenters. For our first presentation, we will hear from Mr. Jordan Traver. Jordan has a broad base of experience in project development that includes environmental studies, facility assessments, financial management, and regulatory compliance for various U.S. and foreign agencies. He has 22 years of experience as a consultant and manager in industrial and commercial construction trades. Jordan's goal is to incorporate renewable energy and new technologies into commercial and residential construction, making stronger, safer, healthier, and more affordable community dwellings. Jordan is the designer and project specialist of the Livingstone Lodge, which is what he will be telling us about today. Following Jordan, we will have a joint presentation from Ms. Josie Hickel and Mr. Nathan Wajeski. Josie is the Executive Vice President of Lands and Resources for Chugach Alaska Corporation, where she is responsible for leading strategy and oversight for land development projects on Chugach's land holdings, as well as pursuing economic development opportunities in the Chugach region. Josie is an active board member and volunteer for several nonprofits, including the Alaska Sea Life Center and the Resource Development Council. She was inducted into the Athena Society in 2012 for outstanding leadership in business and community service. Josie is a lifelong Alaskan of Aleut descent and a shareholder of Chugach Alaska Corporation. She grew up in a remote homestead near Moose Pass, Alaska, where she and her siblings lived a traditional subsistence lifestyle. Joining Ms. Hickel is Nathan Wajeski. Nathan has undergraduate and graduate forestry degrees from Northern Arizona University and has over 15 years of professional experience in the forestry field. He is a SAF certified forester and represents Alaska Native corporations on the Alaska Board of Forestry. Nathan has worked in Utah, Arizona, West Africa, Virginia, and Alaska as a graduate student, Peace Corps volunteer, and forester. Nathan moved to Alaska in 2009 and has been working as the Chugachmiut forestry manager since then. He has worked on various projects, including project management, forest management planning, forest inventory, fire and fuels, forest health, and carbon credits. Our next presentation will be from Mr. Lenny Gold. Lenny is the General Manager of the Gila River Indian Community Utility Authority. He has over 48 years of utility and consultant experience in utility operations and maintenance, power supply, service agreements, scheduling and dispatching, metering, reserve requirements, energy banking, future power requirements, and rate structures. Lenny authored the handbook titled Establishing a Tribal Utility Authority in 2012. He is also the president of the Arizona Tribal Energy Association and the Southwest Public Power Agency. Lenny holds Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering degrees, as well as a Master's in Science in Engineering Science from RPI. Our final presentation will be from Ms. Lindsay Box. Lindsay is an enrolled member of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. She has spent the last 8 years working for the tribal organization, with the last 4 in the Tribal Council Affairs as the Tribal Council Communication Specialist. Lindsay also serves as a board member of the National Tribal Energy Association. When she is not working, Lindsay enjoys spending time with her family, including husband and 2 sons. Thanks to each of our presenters for making the time to join us today. With that, let's get started with our first presentation. Jordan is starting his presentation with a brief video, which we will play now. After the video, Jordan will bring up your slides, or we will bring up your slides, and you may proceed once they are up.
Rounding the corner for tribal housing. We have a vision for healthy, energy efficient, affordable housing for Native American families. Next. So our goals include design and build a net zero energy home design for Native American families, commercialized plans, kits, and instructions for tribes across the nation. What our hope is that at the end of this project, we're going to have a kit home that can be provided to any tribe anywhere in the nation and easily constructed. Next. This was the concept of where we were trying to take this project. Next. And this was the reality of what we ended up with. And everyone was very pleased. Very surprised we won the first place builders award in 2019 for a small community and a small project like this. It was really exciting for all of us. Next. And upon completing the residence, the model home comparison report was done. Next. And when we compared this home to a new home that's in the same area within a quarter mile of the Livingstone Lodge location, the new home was almost a fail, and those were the words of the test, the people that had shown up on the site to do the testing. This is thermal imaging. It shows the warmth of the Livingstone Lodge home. Next. And this is the thermal imaging of the stick frame, the new home that was done in the same area. What we contribute that to is that the insulation has fallen down, or it just doesn't even exist in those areas, and that entire house looked a lot like that. Next. Next. So I wanted to point out a few of the mistakes we made, because we learned to embrace the mistakes that we made and really helped move the project forward. In the lower left-hand corner, when we originally started designing these homes, we used to put the ICF wall on a footing and then come back and pour the concrete slab. In this picture, you see that the sand is full of water. We had 5 rain events in 2019 that prevented us from staying on construction schedule. Went back to the engineers, and they were able to redesign a monolithic slab, which is what you see is formed up in the upper left-hand corner, and then the completion of the monolithic slab on the right-hand photo. Next. When the slab's completed, we go in and stack the ICF wall. At this point, we're having to custom cut every block, and it takes quite a few man hours to do that. Once the blocks are all in place and the rebar's in place, then the concrete is pumped into the wall. That's the photo on the right-hand side. Next. With the kit home that's being produced for release in 2021, this is an illustration of the same home being built, but with all pre-cut block. Our manufacturer is producing custom molds and custom blocks so that every block is pre-cut, custom colored, and easy to assemble. Next. This is another lesson learned. We went by the engineer's guide as far as what penetrations we'd need through the wall of the house to get into the mechanical systems. And what we realized in doing that, this is the photo on the left, is we wouldn't have any flexibility if we wanted to add solar or wind energy or convert to a different type of system. So the engineers went back to the drawing board. They put in a window buck system that we just used the green tree plywood, and we're able to cut holes and modify and add or take things away at any time. So tremendous upgrade right there. Next. This is a great day when you see the beams fly. That all happens in one day, and the structure begins to look like a house. Next. So lesson learned on that one was we were cutting each beam custom to fit in the beam saddle and the compression ring. Each beam was cut custom, and it was taking hours of time. We learned how to instead of custom cutting, we learned how to cut each beam an inch short, and now we can install those beams in a matter of minutes, and then we just drive that plastic wedge in, and once the wedge is driven in, somebody comes back and fills that void with like a non-shrink grout type of product. So we reduced it from hours to minutes for installing the beams, which is a great lesson. Next. Kind of had the same situation with the roof panels. The SIPS roof panel, if you look at the upper left-hand picture, that SIPS roof panel, we put it in 2 pieces. And the same situation, trying to get the 2 pieces to fit together. Once we had it up on the beams, very challenging and took quite a bit of time. So we determined it would be easiest to put the 2 pieces together on the ground. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that now we put that whole piece up instead of the 2 individual pieces. The great news is that reduced the installation of that roof from 3 days down to 1 day. Next. This is just a picture of what the building envelope starts to look like when we get the roof on and the walls up. And then if you'll notice the insulation to the left there, we use 4 inches of a urethane insulation to tie some ground insulation to the side of the structure. So really a nice building envelope, and really performs well. It actually performs better than what the engineers thought it would when it was designed. Next. So these are just some pictures of thermal imaging during a blower door test. When we get the building envelope closed in, before we start doing any of the interior construction, we go through this testing, and it shows us where we need to make corrections before we move ahead. And if you look at the center picture there, those little blue feather-like things, those are all air leaks at the end of a beam. We're able to go back and correct that real easily before we do the rest of the construction. The lower right-hand picture where you see the blue on the orange, that is window leakage. A window seal didn't work out well. We'll be able to go back and correct that before we finish the construction. These are all huge things for us. Our whole concept when it comes to energy is energy not used is the best renewable source. And I think we probably all agree with that. Next. Next. So this is the model home, and the pictures that you're seeing here, we just recently installed the solar panels, and we didn't know exactly how effective they'd be, but they are producing about 80% of all of the electricity that the model home requires. Next. So this slide I want to spend just a little more time on. Of the 6 homes that we have in our development, 2 of them will be net zero, the 2 that you're looking at on this slide. And the way that we're doing that is we are making these 2 houses completely, it's called electrification, where they're completely electrical. There's no carbon base heating for these homes. So in this picture, we're just showing the drilling rig right behind the house. We're able to drill 2 300-foot wells, and those 2 wells will provide all the heating and all the cooling for this house. And a lot of people felt that it was not going to be cost effective, but I just want to share with everyone today that those 2 wells cost a total of $7,100 terminated into the house, and their payback is almost double of some of the other resources that we're using. Next slide. This is just more of the geothermal well operation. These wells go down 300 feet. They run water into the ground 300 feet. They recirculate back up out of the ground. And then we run them through a heat pump unit that it takes the BTUs, whether it's for heating or for cooling, and it transfers them. And then they're distributed out to the house. Next slide. So we thought this was a great opportunity to look at more than just one option for heating and cooling. And there's a new technology out. It's called Chiltrex. It's an inverter-driven type of air-to-water heat source or heat pump. And the only reason I put this slide in, I didn't have any good schematics of the heat pump. But if you'll notice, all of those components are being purchased for a price of about $9,000. Now, those are retail prices. Those are not what we pay, but that is not a lot more money than what you would have in a conventional boiler type of system, or some of the other systems that you would use that are not as efficient as this. Next slide. So I think one of the biggest takeaways for us is this has been a challenging project, especially with some of the things that are happening. And what we learned right away on this project is it really takes a strong team to hold it all together and keep it together. This was the beginning of our team. We have Councilman Corey Spotted Bear from the Twin Buttes South segment. Corey has a vision for sustainable housing. Corey has a passion for this project and just do anything that it requires to support what's happening here. This is our chairman, Mark Fox, and the 3 affiliated tribes has been incredibly supportive. Next slide. And just to show you some of the team, our tribal council, of course, is heading this up. We have engineers, architects. We're trying to do as much construction as we can with local workers, and that's for a great cost savings. Plus, it also creates jobs in our community. We have people that have been very excited about the project that have come in and volunteered their time to help with some of the construction. But our tribal finance office has been incredibly supportive, our tribal grant office. We have a construction management office. They have come and done inspections for us and helped us with numerous things. So just wanted to make mention that we feel one of the great takeaways on this is the team that has been involved in this for so long and has supported it and kept it on track. Next slide. These are some of our professional partners. There was Duran Architects out of Bismarck, North Dakota. Duran Architects has actually worked on this design for over 13 years. CW Structural did all the structural work for the design. Prairie Engineering is our mechanical and our renewable engineer. They're again out of Bismarck, North Dakota. And then DMA Engineers out of Colorado. They have done a lot of the modeling and assisted us with a number of the changes to make the houses more efficient. Home Energy Science, they do all of the testing. The next list is some of our vendor partners. Amvic is our ICF manufacturer out of Canada. Intercept is our SIPS manufacturer out of South Dakota. Western Structures, our beam manufacturer out of Oregon, and just great companies to work with. Pella Windows and Doors, Buyer Built Doors out of Minnesota. Just really high quality partners that we have on the vendor side. We also partner with some of the other tribes. Rock Industries from Standing Rock. They manufacture all the steel components for these homes. And then the state of North Dakota, they gave us a grant to do some of the design and development for the net zero homes. So we're excited to see that come to a very successful close. Next slide. So on the original house, this little sign off in the left-hand corner, rounding the corner, that was our little group that put the prototype together. Those are 3 of our local workers that were consistent from the beginning to the end of the project. Out in front of the house is my wife and myself and our little dog. And the next slide, at the end of the top column, is that is the lead mechanical engineer, Randy Axvig from Prairie Engineering, and then Chris Wentz from CW Structural. And then the Spirit Lake School, they volunteer and they build some of the wooden components for these houses. So again, we got some great relationships. Next slide. And we would invite everyone to look at the website, livingstonelodgeND.org or livingstonelodgeND.com, and follow our progress. We're trying to upgrade the project as much as possible, at least every other month. So thank you for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, Jordan. What a cool project. It's great to see the geothermal technologies being used. Those heat pumps are pretty remarkable in the right circumstances. Next, we'll move up to Alaska. Josie, looks like your slides are up. Feel free to proceed.
Thank you, Shmai. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to speak today about our carbon project that we have in Alaska, and also along with that, we had a interesting transaction with some coal rights that we owned. So I'll go ahead and get started. For those of you not in Alaska, that first slide is a great photo of what our environment looks like here, especially this time of year. The Chugach Alaska Corporation, next slide, thanks. The Chugach Alaska Corporation is one of 12 Alaska Native corporations that was established under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. And on this map, you can see those 12 different regions that the state was separated into under ANCSA. And the Chugach area is the dark green that you see in the lower part of the map. Next slide. This is just a closer image of what our region looks like in Alaska. The yellow dots are our village corporations, and then you can also see some of our communities that are in our region. Chugach, under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, was awarded 378,000 acres of surface estate and 550,000 acres of subsurface. And the intention of the land awards were to create self-sustainability for our Alaska Native people. And so those ANCSA lands were intended to be used to help with our development and sustaining our Alaska Native people from our region. Next slide. This is a photo of some historic shots of some of our people, and I think the important thing to note here, as with many Indigenous groups, of course, we are tied to our lands, and we have evidence of over 5,000 years of the Chugach people subsisting and living on the lands in the Chugach region, and we continue to honor and celebrate those traditions today. And so our lands are extremely important to us, and it's very important for us to provide the best possible level of stewardship for those lands as well. Next slide. So the question that we had to ask ourselves is that we have these lands, nearly 1 million acres, if you combine the surface and subsurface estate. The lands look a lot like what you see in this picture. Lots of mountaintops and glaciers, very, very remote, hard to access areas. So how can we use those lands to create these sustainable shareholder benefits, which is what was intended under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, to elevate the status of our people while still retaining ownership of those lands, because as I said before, the lands are so important to our culture and our heritage, and also providing the best level stewardship. And that was the challenge that our board was faced with. And as they were asking themselves the question, they started to look into some alternative opportunities for these lands that they felt would provide all of these benefits that we were talking about. Next slide. So in probably around 2012, Chugach, our board, learned about a growing opportunity in the California cap and trade market, which is a carbon, the intent was to reduce emissions, and so they had the opportunity to put forest lands into carbon offset projects under an improved forest management program. And of course, there are other types of ways to sequester carbon, but given the lands that Chugach had, this seemed like a really good opportunity for us. And so we began to look into that project. We have a lot of lands that are heavily forested, and at the time, Alaska was not included in the program, and so it required many years of Chugach lobbying the state of California, the California Air Resources Board, to be able to allow Alaska, certain inventory forests in Alaska, into the carbon offset project. But it paid off over a number of years. We finally were successful and were able to get Alaska included into the program, which helped not just only our native organization, but also the other regional organizations that had lands that could be included in these projects as well. And Nathan Lajewski is sharing this presentation with me, and he can talk a little bit more about that in his presentation. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we owned a significant number of acres in what's called the Bering River coal field, and that coal field was discovered in the late 1800s. And again, extremely remote area, but more importantly, a very highly sensitive ecological area. It's right next to the Copper River Delta, which is where our famous Copper River salmon come from. A really lot of wildlife species, bird species, as their breeding grounds. And so, as I mentioned earlier, stewardship of our lands and sustaining our subsistence lifestyle is extremely important to us. So as part of this transaction, we were able to do a conservation of the coal rights in the same area where we had a carbon project. So we conserved roughly 62,000 acres of coal rights in that area. So we were able to get the dual benefit of having this coal conservation at the same time as moving forward with our carbon offset project. Next slide. I don't want to go into a lot of detail because we don't have time about how the carbon sequestration project works, so I'm just going to mention a couple high-level things. The way that it started, of course, it came out of the Paris Agreement, and California really began to make progress on their cap and trade program. And the idea was that they wanted to reduce emissions that were coming from companies such as manufacturing companies, transportation companies, oil and gas companies to a certain level by the year 2030. And there are really three ways to do that. One of that is just strictly to reduce their emissions through either reducing production or new greener technologies. They could also buy allowances, and an allowance is sort of like a fine if you go over your emission requirement, then you would have to pay a certain amount to buy these allowances. And there was a third option, which is called an offset. And the offset is a lower cost vehicle, but only a certain amount of their emission reduction requirement can be met with offsets. It's about 4%. But those offsets mean that they're allowing for there to be carbon sequestration in another area that then offsets this added amount of emission that they're experiencing. And so because we have the forests which sequester carbon, we were able to be part of that offset program. So I have a little definition in there about an offset is an alternative compliance instrument voluntarily generated by a non-regulated entity, which would be us, Chugach, and sold to regulated entities through bilateral purchase agreements. So it acts like a stock market almost. You put your project into the California Cap and Trade Program, and Nathan can talk a little bit about the mechanics of that. It takes a long time for that project to get approved. It's a very strict and difficult process to go through, but once it's done and you get approved, you get these carbon credits. So 1 ton of carbon is equal to 1 carbon offset credit, and then you can sell them on the market. And we worked with a developer by the name of Forest Carbon Projects. It also goes by New Forest, that helped us through this project as well. Next slide. So the benefits of the carbon project to Chugach and to our 2,700 plus shareholders is that we realize the financial benefits from our lands. Our lands are managed to assure our forests remain healthy. We continue to retain our ownership. We can pursue other opportunities on the land. So, we could do like an ecotourism, for example, as long as we're maintaining those carbon stocks. And by the way, that's a 100-year commitment. So we have to agree to maintain those carbon stocks for 100 years. And we also have opportunities for shareholder hire and business development. We worked with Chugachmiut, and Nathan will talk about that, but that's been was an important element of this project. We wanted to provide jobs and opportunities for our shareholders. And we're also contributing to a healthy environment for our lands as well as on a global scale. Next slide. This is a photo of our young shareholders that were part of the team that went out and supported our carbon project working with Chugachmiut. So again, just so nice to be able to see our shareholders out working these jobs and getting that level of training. Next slide. So I want to go ahead and hand things over to Nathan, but it's a complicated project. Didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it's been a wonderful opportunity for Chugach and for our shareholders, and we appreciate the opportunity to share that with you today. Thank you.
Hi, this is Nathan, and I work for Chugachmiut, and we serve the same people as the Chugach Alaska shareholders, but we're a nonprofit Native corporation. We represent 7 communities in the Chugach region, and you can switch to the next slide, please. And so this map I actually pulled from Chugach Alaska's webpage because they have a good map, but this shows the region which Josie showed you. But Chugachmiut means people of the Chugach. So let's go on to the next slide. There's really 3 main types of Native land ownership in the region or in Alaska. We have our Alaska Native corporations or ANCSA corporations. They're generally large landowners. They own anywhere from 10,000 to 500,000 acres. And in our region, we have 4 carbon projects. One of them with the regional corporation Chugach, Alaska, but 3 of the village corporations, Port Graham, English Bay, and Saldovia, have also enrolled into this program. But Chugachmiut really got interested in this project because we have a BIA compact to manage the native allotments in the region. And we have about 63 native allotments totaling 10,000 acres. But also in the region, we have some tribal lands. Most of the villages have a few hundred acres directly surrounding the village. So I guess the land ownership in Alaska is complex and a little different than the lower 48. Go on to the next slide, please. But so Chugachmiut, we moved into carbon consciously for 2 main reasons. One of them was that we wanted to keep the land in native ownership, regardless of what type of native land it was. And we also wanted to help our shareholders or beneficiaries and landowners develop income from their lands. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of one of our villages, Port Graham. This is almost all the land you see here is native owned. And outside of the village of Port Graham, it's mostly undeveloped, and traditional subsistence use dominates this landscape. And our goal is to keep the land this way and to keep our communities looking like this. I'm going to show you a picture next of a community just a few miles north of Port Graham. This is Halibut Cove. It's mostly private. It's heavily developed. It's dominated by vacation homes and tourism. And there's a lot of wealthy landowners here. And if something like this was to occur in any of our villages, our locals could be priced out of their home pretty quickly. And so we don't want this to happen. Next slide, please. So the other reason we looked at or got into this was for workforce development. And we've been able to develop some workforce. And Josie showed some pictures of some of the folks that we used for forest inventory crews. Seasonally, we've needed about 4 to 10 people most summers to support these carbon projects, as well as other land management. And then we've also have some professional level natural resource managers. Chugachmiut has 2 full-time forestry positions that are partially funded through carbon credit work. And what we want to do is build the technical capacity to support these ANC, or the Alaska Native Corporation projects. They're going to go on for 100 years, but in about 5 years from the initiation of these projects, most of the developers are going to leave, and that managing these projects is going to be in the hands of the landowners. And we want to make sure that those projects can be successful. Can we go to the next slide? So here's a picture of some forest inventory. This is actually on native allotments surrounded by Chugach Alaska Corporation land. And that's the Wrangell St. Elias in the background at Icy Bay. So I'm going to hopefully use some pictures here to make you guys all want to come to Alaska once we can travel more easily. These pictures here this is Port Graham Surface Estate in Chugach, Alaska, owns the subsurface, but we are training some folks from the village of Port Graham to work on these forest inventory projects. And here they're actually working with the inventory contractors brought up from the lower 48 on, they worked on both the Port Graham project and the Chugach Alaska project. And this worked really well because the folks from our villages in our region know how to do business and get around in Alaska, whereas the folks, the contract cruisers happen to be from Wisconsin, and it was a total foreign environment for them. And I'll get into that a little bit more next. So the other thing that we can, Chugachmiut or local Alaskans can bring to these projects is the Alaska savvy field logistics. We know how to do things in this remote environment. And some of our tribal members who didn't want to actually measure trees or do the forestry type work help supported these projects logistically. And I'm going to go through a couple pictures to show you what accessing these lands are like. We're using boats. The picture in the middle there is a helicopter that's at Carbon Mountain, where the coal fields that Josie was talking about are. And this is when we are moving our crews out. You can see there's a rolled up Zodiac on the beach. That helicopter was about an hour flight from refueling, and that helicopter has about 3 hours of fuel on board. And to use it to access the lands, we have to bring in fuel and plan how much fuel we're going to use, and float plane these in and get them into these remote areas. And on the right, we're using snow machines to access some lands up on the Kuskokwim River. Go to the next slide. This picture on the left is a picture of that Zodiac that was on the beach. We had to camp crews out in the woods for 2 to 3 weeks in these remote areas where the only access was helicopter or float plane. I mean, I guess you could hike there if you wanted to, but it'd be a very long expedition. And the picture on the right is at Nuka Bay, which is just south of the Kenai Fjords National Park, or in the Kenai Fjords National Park area, which has quite a bit of Native Corporation in holdings. And also we have a carbon project in that area. And this last picture again, one of the things that our local folks really bring to these projects is they know how to work in this environment with this kind of equipment, packing a helicopter and flying out to the field, dealing with the fuel, the camping. And on the right there's a picture. This is I don't know if you can see, there's a track, but this is a bear track. And our folks know how to carry shotguns and bear spray and how to use those. And to the left there's a big pile of frozen bear poop. This is a coastal brown bear, or they're called grizzly bears in the lower 48. So these projects are really great for our local folks to join in on. And the next slide. So just to put this all together at Chugachmiut, we've been able to develop some capacity to support these projects, and we've had 3 different outside paying forest inventory jobs in the last 18 months. We were awarded a contract from New Forest, who is the developer for Chugach's project, to manage their Alaska carbon projects. And we are developing the capacity to support these projects and create some seasonal local job opportunities. And I'll show you a couple more pictures and I'll wrap it up. So next slide, please. So these are some pictures on the Kuskokwim River, and the folks on the right there are shareholders from Chugach Alaska Corporation who live in Port Graham and Wallach, doing forest inventory outside of their region with skills they learned on the Chugach Alaska project and the Port Graham project. Next slide, please. And I'll leave it with that. This is a picture of me at the Carbon Mountain area where the Chugach Alaska, a piece of the Chugach Alaska's carbon project and where their coal fields reside. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan and Josie. Excellent presentations, really interesting projects there. I will note that there's a lot of sun in those pictures, much more sun than I've experienced in coastal Alaska. So
yeah, we get out the
they're beautiful though.
Not going to get ruined.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So Lenny, your slides are up. Please proceed.
I want to thank everyone for allowing me to share the story of Gricure with you. And if you go to the next slide. So this is the Gila River Utility Authority. Indian Utility Authority is, we're an entity of the Gila River Indian community. And as you can see, the location within the state of Arizona, the reservation is 585 square miles. Approximate population on the reservation is about 11,700. Total enrollment, 22,000 plus. Next slide. This is the area that we serve. So there are 7 districts within the Gila River Indian community. We serve districts 1 through 5 and a portion of 6. So we're the yellow area. The blue area is served by the Salt River Project, and the reddish area is served by Arizona Public Service. Those are other utilities within the state. Next slide, please. So Gricure was established for a number of reasons in 1998. As you can see, of the 3 key ones. And the reason that Gricure was established was to begin to serve the area shown to the right, which was where they built their first casino. And the utility that was serving this area had poor service, had poor reliability, and they wanted to improve that, as well as owning the infrastructure that was being built. We go to the next slide. So you can see the mission and key is to provide and furnish utility services, promote and encourage conservation, and to improve the health and welfare of the residents of the community, and basically to perform as an electric utility and to help with economic development and employment opportunities, which I'll talk about later. If we go to the next slide. So our system actually overlaps that with an entity called the San Carlos Irrigation Project, which is an agency of the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, that served the community for since the community had electricity going back into the 20s. SCIP owns a lot of infrastructure that we now operate and maintain via a 638 contract. Within our service area, we serve all retail customers except SCIP has some irrigation wells, and we take care of all customers, all outages within the community. Next slide. This shows the makeup of an electric system, and really the stuff in the gray shaded area is what we serve and take care of. And we didn't start out this way, but this is where we are today. So in 1999, we started out just serving customers, and we've grown over the years. If you go to the next slide. This is the area that we serve, the substations, the transmission that we have to maintain, and the distribution services that we provide. Next slide, please. So this is where we've been. So like I said, back in 2000, we started with 2 employees. Today, we actually have, we've grown from 27 to we have 33 employees. We now have 6 community members who are employees that I'll talk a little bit about later. We have 5 Native American employees. So about a third of our workforce is either community or Native American. As you can see, we've grown in size from the number of customers, starting with 12 customers to serving over 3,400 customers. So tremendous growth, tremendous load increase due to that. And I think the key is if you look down under where it says respond to outages, in 2010, when we entered into the 638 contract, that's when we started taking over the responsibility for the outages, and that's key to our growth. Next slide, please. So our duties and responsibilities, the high level is we do operations, we have finance, we do planning, customer service, and customer outreach, which is really important for the community, and it's important for my board in that we give something back to the community and make opportunities, create opportunities for the youth, and we've had several programs that do that we'll talk about. Next slide. So this is our existing resources that we have. Majority is made up through contract for natural gas generating plant, and very little at the moment solar. But as you can see, our future, which will be in about 2 years, we've been developing a utility scale solar project. We won't own it; it'll be owned by a third party, but we will be an off-taker. We'll be taking, it's a 50 megawatt project, of which we will take 10 megawatts of that project. And we also, as part of the contract, the community will have a land lease, so the community benefits. And then we benefit in that we will be providing the operation and maintenance for the solar facility. So we actually are hiring community members, training them to become solar technicians, and they will be responsible for keeping this project online as well as future projects that come into the community. Next slide, please. So the finance department has 3 areas: customer service, accounting, and energy forecasting. Next slide, please. So the advantages that we see to our customers is we've been able to reduce our bills to between 2 to 5% lower than our surrounding utilities, SKIP, and on par with Salt River Project, which is another utility that serves District 6 and 7. We offer plans to help our customers avoid disconnects when they can't afford to pay their bill. We make arrangements so we can try to keep them on. Other utilities require deposits. We don't require deposits, and we believe that we are more responsive to our customers and to outage calls within the community. Next slide, please. The operations department, they're responsible for engineering, design, and mapping, purchasing and warehouse of materials, and then the operation, maintenance, and construction of our facilities. Next slide. So we maintain things. We fix, our poles, our wires, our transformers. While we don't have winter storms, we have summer microbursts that come along and they'll just snap poles in 2, even brand new poles. A couple of summers ago, we had a storm come through the Gila River bed. Dry, it's typically dry, but it came through and it snapped 6 of our poles. And it took us, we had to muster our crew plus some support crews and to get that reestablished within 4 days. But in the meantime, we were able to keep all our customers in power because we had built additional field ties to other circuits and were able to reroute the power so that we kept all our customers back in power while we restored these broken poles. Next slide. For planning, we do, again, we build new infrastructure, and we're going out there and we're constantly looking at what needs to be done Skip, when they had the system, they maintained it at what we consider to be like low C minus, maybe a D plus. Since we've taken over, we have built the system, rebuilt things, worked with Skip. They've been beneficial in terms of helping us get things done so that we have built a more robust system. Next slide, please. On the operations side, our mantra is safety, safety, safety. It's the #1 priority within the organization because our linemen going out there at any one time, if they're not careful, they're going to do serious injury to themselves, including they could die. Also, we make that aware to our customers to be very careful around our equipment, constantly reminding them not to play on it, not to if there's a down wire, to avoid it and call us and we'll take care of it. And so we respond to our outages. Next slide, please. And so we're prepared. We respond to outages 24/7. We get calls, we go out, our crews. Typically, it seems that all the calls come late at night, 2, 3 in the morning is when they seem to come for some reason, and we're able to respond to that. Next slide. Since 2009, we have spent or invested over $43 million in system improvements and maintenance. This includes adding substations, replacing transformers, building, as I said earlier, field ties to improve reliability. It's just, it's an ongoing effort, but we had a lot of ground to make up because the system hadn't been maintained as well as it should have been. Next slide. I talked earlier about the importance of training and bringing community members into the organization. This was a priority from the day that the GEOTHERMAL was established, and the boards over the years have been focused on doing that and finding ways to do it. We tried looking for and hiring community members right off the bat, but there was a lack of training on that. And so we created our own opportunities to bring community members in and to train them. We have 4 programs that we have since developed. We have an apprentice lineman program. It's a 4-year program, training program. At the end of it, it's like having a college degree. And we currently have 1 community member in the program who actually started with us in some of our high school training opportunities that we provide, which I'll talk about in the community outreach. We have a technical training program, which is a 1-year program, which allows community members to come in, get experience. We send them, we have college courses that they take online. They work in different departments. At the end of the year, they're ready to they have the basics for us to either hire them or they can go to some other entity within the community, but they have skill sets that will put them ahead of other potential employees. The technical training program graduates then can go into our designer and training program, which is we are trying to train community members to become the designers who go out and work with customers to install and establish the necessary infrastructure to provide service to new customers as well as existing. And then I mentioned the solar technician training program, again, where that's open only to community members. So technical training program graduates go into one of those 2 programs, or they can go into the apprentice lineman program. And right now we have 1 community member, the apprentice lineman, and we have 2 solar technical training trainees right now, and 1 designer in training. Next slide. So we talk about the outreach, and what I want to focus on is the youth programs. This is something that is really important to the community. It started out with the Washington Youth Tour program, which is sponsored by the NRECA, and we send high school students to Washington, and they get an opportunity to see what co-ops do, cooperatives, electric cooperatives, which we are similar to. We're not exactly like it, but that's what we follow, and also get an understanding of how government works and meet other students from across the country. From that program, we developed our internship programs, where we have high school summer interns. They come in and they work for us for the summer. We rotate them through all of our departments, and they get, it's similar, a lot of times it's their first job. They have to do an interview, they have to prepare a job application. When they leave, they have to make a presentation to the board, and they also get to develop a resume. We work with them to develop a resume for them. We also do the same thing for college summer interns. There we put them in one department, we interview them and decide where would be best fit for them to work, and we put them in either finance side of it or our GIS or in our warehouse or something like that. And then we have the board, we have the youth board members internship, where the board has interviewed and selected a community member who is an intern to the board. So they sit in on all the board meetings, they participate, they're interactive, they get all the materials, and the objective is that at the end of a couple of years, they'll have the experience to serve on boards within the community. The final thing is the STEAM program, and we basically expanded the STEM program to add architect, agriculture, and art to it, and we've been doing this for the last 3 years. We take students from grades 5th through 8th grade, and they spend a week right after school is out in June participating in this program, and we take them through all of the different activities that we have. This year we couldn't do it because of COVID, so we did it online, and we didn't have as many participants, but they all participated in the events that we had them do projects at home. And we're doing it now on an ongoing basis. We have an ongoing monthly program for students to get online, and we have a number of students who are participating in that. Next slide, please. So the benefits to the community, there's a lot of them, but I think the key is that the community has control of what's going on with the energy within the community. We make reports to council covering our operations. We don't make a profit. We don't take any money from the community directly. Our customers do pay for the energy they purchase, and the commercial customers, non-community customers, pay as well, and that's how we build and sustain this organization. The key is, if we go to the next slide, which is just to show kind of what happens. So an off-reservation utility, if you break out the different components of how revenue would be allocated, you can see the blue is the energy purchase. Most of that money is spent and goes off reservation. O&M, if it's an off-reservation utility, the majority of it's going to go off reservation. Wages as well. The yellow slice there, which is capital, is the investment in infrastructure, which is owned by the off-reservation utility. So they own it, and the money goes off, and any margin or whatever will go off reservation. So that's the way it looks with a third party. If you look at how GEOTHERMAL operates, the next slide, please. You can see that we have the same situation. We don't have any resources. We're not generating any electricity except for a little bit of solar on reservation. So the majority of those money goes off. But O&M, the majority of that money stays within the community because of how we spend it and how we invest and make improvements. The same with wages. Yeah, we have non-community member employees, so that goes off, but the efforts that they put in and the work that they do stays within the community. The key is ownership. GEOTHERMAL owns all of the infrastructure that it's putting in, which in turn means the community owns it. And all of our capital is invested back into the community. The margin is invested back into the community. So we're turning all of these off-reservation cash flows and putting them back into the community to benefit the community. Next slide, please. So the capabilities that GEOTHERMAL has developed over the years is, in addition to reinvesting and improving the electric system, we've been able to maintain and keep our rates stable since we just had a rate decrease. It wasn't large, but we had a rate decrease, but we had not changed our rates since 2010. So we went almost 10 years without any increase in rates, and then we were able to lower them. It was about a 3% reduction in rates. We've created employment opportunities, training and mentoring opportunities for community members, which is something that the community had in their vision when they established GEOTHERMAL, and we're starting to actually put that in place in a robust manner. The staff is very familiar with the community, and we work with all community departments, and we address issues. We do things that the community, sometimes we'll get a call from a department. They had a wetlands area where they needed to put up a new nesting area for an eagle because whatever they had fell over. And we worked with them and brought our trucks in there and helped put up a new nesting area for those for the eagles. So we work directly with the community, and we also work, as I said earlier, you know, we're available 24/7, 365 to operate and maintain the system. Next slide. This is a picture of the office building that we built about 5 years ago. It's a LEED Gold building with the covered parking solar. And we built this and did this in a way so that we could make it a building for the community to see how you can utilize energy efficiently. All the artwork inside the building was done by, we commissioned community artists to do original artwork for us, with the understanding that they retain all copyright to their artwork so that they could do whatever they wanted with it, in addition to providing it to us. And the next slide is just our list of my board members. And with that, again, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity for us to share the story of GEOTHERMAL. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lenny. What a cool utility authority. That's a great success story. Our last presentation, and looks like we're doing well on time, so we will have plenty of time for questions. So please do submit questions. Our last presentation will be from Ms. Lindsay Box. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike, my name is Lindsay Box, and I'd like to first begin by thanking the staff here, DOE, for allowing me the opportunity to present and share a little bit about my people and our energy development legacy. Next slide. Here I am. I'm also a member of the tribe, and I'm an employee of the tribe. I work as the Tribal Council Communications Specialist, but I'm also a board member of the National Tribal Energy Association. I hope that you guys are all doing well and maintaining safe precautions for yourself and your family and your loved ones. Next slide, please. So the Southern Ute Indian Tribe is located in the southwestern portion of Colorado. It is one of 2 historical tribes to the state of Colorado, and one of the few tribes who are fortunate enough to remain on our original homelands, which are culturally significant to us. There's approximately 1,500 tribal members, and our reservation is over 680,000 acres. So the tribe is known for its energy development legacy, and tribal production began in the 1950s and then ramped up operations in the early 1990s. And so I think it's really important when telling this story, providing a little bit of historical context to that. And so it's a sort of a quick rapid fire history lesson to understand how we ended up here and were able to really exercise our sovereignty and take control of our self-determination and provide for our people. So in the early 1870s, oil seeps were discovered around the San Juan Basin, and natural gas as well. And that was by pure accident of the settlers who were coming into the area. During the Federal Homestead Act, that opened up parts of the reservation, which complicated our land status as well. There are different tribal statuses of land holdings, as well as public, private, or public fee land. And so what we refer to our reservation as is checkerboarded, one side of the fence could be private fee land and another side could be tribal land, and both bring different opportunities, different approval processes, and a quicker or sometimes lengthier approval process, and being able to generate some income. So during the Federal Homestead Act, about half the land was sold or given to settlers of our reservation for about $8 an acre, which is crazy if you think about that today. Coal at the time was a pretty hot commodity and was transferred those mineral rights to the oil and gas mineral rights, to the settlers. That created a complex situation of ownership and to go along with the land jurisdiction. In the 1920s, the first commercially produced oil well took place, and then a few years later, about a decade later, in 1936, the tribe became a federally recognized tribe, one of the historical treaty tribes. The government transferred the coal rights ownership back to the tribe, which we still retain ownership rights to those resources today. In about 1951, so it's a very expedited history lesson. In 1951, natural gas was discovered, and BIA and the USGS handled all of the tribe's contracts, monetary and collection of payments, and they did so for about the next 25 years. At that time, the tribe wrote a rehabilitation plan to come up with, basically a game plan of how we were going to solidify economic development for the tribe and the people in its future. In 1980, Congress passed the crude oil windfall profits tax, and that helped create tax incentives for fuel sources. And so through the years, those tax credits have been beneficial, where they have been more profitable than actually the sales of some of those resources. And also in the 80s, the Hickory Apache Nation, which is a neighbor to the Southern Ute Indian tribe, passed a severance tax, and that was a case that was litigated through different courts, and it was ruled on by the Supreme Court that the Hickory Apache Nation had the authority to implement a severance tax. And at that time, the tribe follows suit, like almost immediately, as soon as the results of that case were made available. In 1982, the passing of the Indian Minerals Development Act allowed the tribe allowed other tribes to write their own contracts, to monitor their own leases, which increases a tribe's ability to exercise sovereignty and to really exercise self-determination. Also in the 80s, the tribe diversified its portfolio at that time, knowing that we couldn't have all of our eggs in one basket. And so we began looking into the stock market. We began purchasing properties and seeing if we could generate some income and revenue with these diversified investments. Also in the 80s, the tribe had litigation where a settlement was reached, and about half of the funds that were awarded to the tribe were allocated to be spent on economic development. And I think at that point is where we really start seeing the tribe's legacy through its leadership for planning for our future and leading and making decisions with vision, making sure that we're able to sustain operations and programs for the membership, and we had the funds to be able to do those things. Also in the 80s, the tribe began conducting audits and on its royalty and severance payments, just wanting to make sure that the tribe was receiving the amounts that they were supposed to. And at that same time, Tribal Council was also visionary to develop a plan to collect data on the resources available on the tribal reservation and about how long we thought that those resources would be available. I think that when you're making any sort of financial planning, you need to guesstimate about how long those resources would be available and it also helps in diversifying the tribe's portfolio. So in 1991, the tribe won a pretty important case, and it's something that's in our museum, where we used a chocolate cookie analogy that helps solidify the tribe's ownership of coal bed methane by saying that the coal bed methane is a product of coal, and so the tribe should also retain ownership of that product when that was given back to the tribe. And so there were companies, oil and gas companies, who were arguing against the ownership of those resources and trying to split that resource into two different products. And the tribe won that case, and that's really where things started to pick up, and the tribe gained some momentum when it comes to energy development. I also think that key relationships with the tribe helped in that, and making sure that we had the right staff, staff with expertise, and people who were willing to advocate for a seat at the table so that the tribe could exercise its sovereignty and the tribe could develop its self-determination. So in 1999, while we're still producing oil and gas, the tribe approved its financial plan, and the financial plan covers everything from tribal operations from a government and business perspective, but also programs and services that could be available to the membership, such as education, healthcare, and day-to-day services. This plan also split the government operations into a government side and a business operation side as a way to protect its resources, but also just to streamline the services and reduce some of the complexities with having cash available, and I guess the scope of what each of the offices were working on. In 1992, the tribe established the Red Willow Production Company, and then a couple years later, they established the Red Cedar Production Company. And you can go to the next slide, please. So these are some of the business operations that the Southern Ute Indian tribe has. We have income generating operations. We have sort of some government style operations, and I'll begin with the Red Willow production. So we started that as a result of some cash that we had available, about $8 million. And then we also contributed monies that were settled in another court case. And so again, our leadership had the vision to be able to take those awarded funds and invest in our future and invest in our people. And so Red Willow Production Company searches for oil and natural gas. It does the drilling, the production, and then follows up with the reclamation when it's time, when those wells are no longer producing. The revenue is determined by the amount sold, and we also compare that to the commodity pricing, and then our bottom line revenue is a reduction of what the expenses are to operate Red Willow production. So Red Willow production began in the San Juan Basin, and we have expanded our operations to multiple different places, such as the Powder River Basin, the Green River Basin, the San Juan Basin, Delaware Basin, and the deep water Gulf of Mexico. So we have both onshore and offshore production. Let's see, so Red Cedar Gathering, the tribe purchased that or began that in 1994 as a joint venture. We are the majority owner, but a joint venture with Kinder Morgan. And that is a midstream company where we gather, treat, and compress the natural gas. And we gather, treat, compress the natural gas from the producers that are on and around the reservation, and then deliver the product to interstate pipelines. There's approximately 900 miles of pipeline within the tribal reservation. And then we have sites throughout the reservation for compression and treating. Aka Energy is another midstream energy company that gathers, treats, and processes natural gas and NGL, so natural gas liquids, for sale to the market. And then we move on to our real estate portfolio, which is, I'm only going to go into a little bit of that because our focus is energy, but it was important to the tribe's story that we diversify our investments and make sure that we have other options for things such as a downturn in the market, a decline of resources, and just to make sure that we were financially stable and healthy. So the Growth Fund real estate portfolio operates in 17 cities where we are both sole owners and joint venture owners. We invest in multi-family apartments, industrial properties, office buildings, hotel properties, and then we also work on land development where we go through the whole processes with the local municipalities to develop those properties for future home sites. An example of that would be the Candelas site in Denver, Colorado. We also have our private equities, which does a lot with funds, and then we also operate the Sky-U Fairgrounds, as well as the Department of Energy, and we also have a utilities division and a wastewater treatment facility. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is one of the sites, our Sampson plant, which is where we treat the natural gas, and then we send it off down the interstate pipelines. Next slide, please. And then I was also asked to present a little bit on our Oxford solar farm. And the tribe was grateful and lucky enough to receive funding from the Department of Energy in approximately 2015, 2016, where we were able to develop a solar farm on a 1-acre tract. And the process for that was to complete a feasibility study. We wanted to make sure that solar made sense for the reservation and our part of Colorado and our part of the world. We wanted to make sure that it fit into our business plans, and I think that's another step when working on energy development, whether it's oil and natural gas or if it's alternative energy. Tribes really need to understand all aspects of that business and make sure that it's something viable for them to delve into and continue those operations. And so the process for that, again, was beginning with a feasibility study and identifying what our goals were. How were we best suited for these solar projects? We needed to identify if utility or commercial scale solar was viable for the reservation. We needed to identify conditions that were economically viable for this project. And we also needed to do a solar voltaic study, so make sure that the technology worked, a low technology risk, the rapid price decline, and make sure that it was widely deployed. And so another step of this process of our Oxford solar tract was the permitting and land access. For anyone that does any sort of development on reservations knows that we have to jump through multiple hurdles in order to get some of these things approved. And so part of that process was going through a NEPA analysis, as well as securing rights of way and land leases. And we were able to successfully do that. The next step was to begin negotiation for the utility project. And those discussions included an interconnection agreement where we negotiated with the local electric utility, and we defined the terms under which this project could connect to the grid. Discussions also included a wheeling agreement, so the costs and terms by which energy would be delivered to a distant buyer and an end user, as well as a power purchase agreement, which defines the rates the project will be paid for, the energy provided to the buyer. And the benefit to the tribal community for the solar tract was that 10 buildings were able to benefit and offset some of the costs for it offset our electric savings. And so we have multiple buildings, government buildings, business buildings that are able to have a reduced utility bill because of this project. And so it took about $3 million, including, as I mentioned in the beginning, a $1.5 million award from the Department of Energy for a community scale clean energy project in Indian country. We sold that power to our local utility, and we generate an equivalent of about 250 households. And let's see if we can move to the next slide. I think I'm just about done. This is a picture of our solar farm, the Oxford Solar Farm, and you see the beautiful San Juan Mountains in the background. And next slide. I think that another thing to add is that the tribe also partakes in the carbon offset program as a benefit or another component of our environmental operations. And so the tribe really started with energy development, and it has grown and changed to where we really use the experience, all of the lessons learned through energy development as a way of growing our sovereignty and self-determination. And that goes to show from trying to take over some of those approval processes for these projects, as well as recently the tribe has been awarded treatment as a state for regulatory authority over water and air quality. And the tribe does have more stringent regulations set in place to protect its environmental resources and our people. And so the tribe, through energy development, has really been able to capitalize on its sovereignty and self-determination. So I think the key points is the key takeaways from the presentation and from our story is to really stay on top of federal legislation. What are the acts that are being proposed? How can Indian country, how can your community benefit from these acts? And really thinking outside of the box, really pushing that thinking, understanding what the processes are, and seeing if there's a way that Indian country, that your community can benefit, as well as working with the various committees to see what work they are conducting and how they're trying to bring, equity between Indian country and the rest of the country. And I think that through that process, you'll build relationships at every level, the local, the state, the federal level, which really come in handy when you're lobbying for your tribal community. It's important to have key staff, and the tribe is fortunate enough through its leadership to have key staff, but also have great leaders sitting in our seats, are making those decisions at just the perfect time. So we're definitely grateful for all of those things. Another takeaway is, you have to take risks, but those risks have to be calculated. You need to have a plan. From 1954 up until today, the tribe, has implemented its financial, strategic, and economic plans in order to make sure that we're still here years down the road and we can still provide for our people. Through energy development, we've been able to provide lots of things for the membership. We've been able to provide education. The tribe has a robust scholarship program that tribal members can take advantage of and go to any school anywhere, and their scholarship, their education is fully paid for. The tribe has and operates the first or one of the very first private Native Montessori schools in the Southern New Indian Montessori Academy. We have a very comprehensive medical benefits plan. We have elders programs, tribal housing programs, youth programs, and cultural preservation programs. And we've been able to carry out all of these things due to the tribe's visionary leadership and its energy development legacy. And through the diversification and plans that we've been able to follow and see through and continually modify as needed to the changes that are made to the tribe's businesses that are operating, but as well as the changes in today's world. And a perfect example of that is the pandemic, and making sure that that our community, that our future is not negatively drastically impacted by events such as these. And so that's all I have. And thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope you guys all learned something, and we can help out, in any way that we can, and come together as Indian country to be able to advocate, even though we're all unique in the projects that we work on, the authorities and on our beliefs. But I think what's really great about Indian country is if progress is made in one tribal community, it's progress that can be made in another. And I think that we're a perfect example of that through our energy development. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Excellent presentation, and way to take us through 50 plus years of history in 20 minutes. That was great. And what a story the Southern Ute energy development is. It's an incredible achievement the tribe has. So that's our last presentation for today. We will now move on to questions. We have about 15 minutes for questions, and we have some that have come in, but I expect we'll have time for some more. So to the audience, please do type in questions that you have for any of our speakers. I'll jump into them now. What does ICF stand for? So this is a question for Jordan, and it's pertaining to the award that you received on the building. So probably a quick answer there. But what does ICF stand for? And then we'll just move on to the next question related to the project, and that is, what are the next steps for your kit home effort, and when will those housing kits be available?
So ICS stands for insulated concrete. ICF is insulated concrete form, and those were the white forms that you saw the concrete being poured into. And for commercialization in 2021, we are on a schedule to produce up to 40 kit homes for 2021, and we're in negotiations on about 25 sales right now. But the problem is the pandemic has really pushed our schedule back. We could see ourselves being 4 to 6 months behind schedule on this project right now. Did that answer the questions?
Yeah, that did. And I'm just going to go through these questions more or less in the order we received. So Jordan, you're probably going to get the questions up front, and then we'll kind of move on to the subsequent speakers. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the SIPs, the advantages of those using those precast or preformed panels, and compare costs and that sort of thing to stick built construction?
Yes, specifically the SIPs, we were able to get an R value of a little over R50, which is our target goal for a net zero or a super energy efficient home. R50 is important. The other thing, the SIPs are real easy to assemble. As I think kind of in the video, it showed some pictures where we're putting up SIPs panels. In one day, we can close in the whole roof system of the house, and we don't have to go back and put all the fasteners and all the sheeting and all the different types of trusses and construction involved in the typical house. Plus, we get a lot of extra interior space inside the house for using the SIPs panels. And as far as the cost, our cost on SIPs panels for one house is approximately $20,000, and that's 2,700 square feet of manufactured panel. So I'd have a hard time maybe looking at the cost, but anybody out there that knows truss and 2,700 square feet, $20,000 is what we pay for a SIPS panel package today with all the fasteners, the sealants, everything that completes the roof system.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Moving on to the carbon credit projects. How are the offsets confirmed? And I imagine it's a pretty complicated explanation, but maybe keep that high level. What's the process to verify that these carbon offsets are real?
This is Nathan. Unless Josie wants to take this one, I can go.
No, Nathan, you go ahead.
Yeah, so once the project is put together and all of the listing documents are supported and all the data is collected, you bring in a third-party verifier who essentially audits your work. And part of that includes visiting a series of those forest inventory plots and remeasuring those to make sure your measurements were good. They review all your calculations. It's pretty darn intense. Once that's occurred, it goes to a registry who kind of does a cursory thing similar to that, and then it goes to the regulator, the California Air Resources Board, who then puts it through another rigmarole. The whole process of verification to credit issuance seems to take a year to 18 months, so it's pretty extensive.
Great, thank you. Are there any way that individuals can participate in the carbon offset projects, either through maybe buying the carbon credits or I guess support the project from an individual perspective?
So I'll start with that, and then maybe Nathan can talk about that as well. There are a number of developing carbon markets, and the California Cap and Trade program that we're involved with is a regulated market, but there's also a large voluntary market. And so smaller landowners can participate in those. And then there also are emerging potential markets where people can participate individually to reduce their own personal carbon use. And so there are a number of emerging programs that are coming out. Did you want to follow on, Nathan?
Yeah, well, just two things. One, through the voluntary program, like I know back when people were flying around in airplanes before COVID, you could go buy offset credits through a voluntary market to offset your carbon emissions from your flight. And I just do a Google search and you can find that sort of thing. So that's available if you want to participate. But as far as small landowners, one of the things Chugachmiut is trying to do is rope together enough small individual landowners like the tribal land around the villages or the native allotments into an aggregate project that could participate in the California Cap and Trade. And we haven't been able to get very far with the Bureau of Indian Affairs on that, being as there's a bunch of trust land, but it is allowed under the California protocol. Yeah.
Thank you. To kind of build off that question, is there a threshold, and I'm sure there's all sorts of variables, but like a rough order of magnitude of like acreage of forested land you would need to make an economic case for a carbon offset project in the regulated California market?
In Alaska, it seems to be about 5,000 acres.
Great, thank you. And one more question here for our Alaska folks. Have you seen any changes in your forest resource related to climate change, or are you anticipating any changes in the forest, and is that going to impact your project in any way?
I do think that we are seeing impacts of climate change in Alaska because Alaska is what makes the United States an Arctic nation, and particularly in the far north. it's more related to things like erosion around shorelines, but we see changes in our fisheries, which is really important to us because that's such a huge subsistence issue for our people, and also it's a significant economic area for the entire state. And so we are starting to see some impacts on the fisheries. And, you know, of course, people have different opinions about climate change and you know, what the best methods are to move forward. But, you know, because of our position as Alaska Native Corporation and our values related to our lands and resources, we think it's very important to be good stewards of our lands and do everything that we can to prevent any kind of global climate change.
Yeah, and I'll add there specifically for forestry in the area where the Chugach lands are. We are seeing Southeast Alaska poster child for climate change is the yellow cedar decline, where the shallow-rooted yellow cedar, when those roots freeze in the winter, it can kill the trees, and the roots are freezing much more frequently because we lack snowpack sometimes in the winter. And so there's been a massive die-off in yellow cedar. And then in addition, as far as fires in the state of Alaska in the last 5 or 10 years moved the official start of fire season 1 month earlier into April from May, because we're seeing in the boreal forest snowpack leave earlier and fires burn sooner.
Great, thank you for those answers. Moving on to Lenny's presentation. Is the utility authority looking to utilize maybe different poles? I think referencing your SNAP poles, or moving to underground distribution?
So we look at, we do use steel poles in certain areas. The lines that I had mentioned were 69 kV lines, so undergrounding them, the cost is very high. And actually using all steel poles is also not cost effective. So we do strategically, we'll insert a steel pole here or there to try and protect it. So that's, and undergrounding, we do some undergrounding of our 12 kV system as we're building new stuff. And the opportunity affords itself if we have a project where we can do some undergrounding, we will do it as well. But it's costs a lot more money to underground the system.
Great, thanks, Lenny. Is Gricula open to new or additional industrial solar development?
Yes, we're looking at different projects. We certainly are. We have a limited amount that we can actually absorb into our system based on our load, but we're looking at what we can do, and we're going to try and develop a program to allow community members to take some of the solar that we've put on the utility scales project and use it, you know, for their, as if they deem it as if they had built it on their rooftop.
Great. Yeah, that's what everybody wants, or many people want, some sort of virtual net metering arrangement. Sure, drives costs down from a developer standpoint, anyway. Similar question actually for Southern Ute. Is Southern Ute open or pursuing larger scale solar development?
Hi, so I think that comes down to the planning and feasibility studies that the tribe likes to complete before they make a decision, and working through that whole approval process, making sure we can secure those rights of way, we can have those utility negotiations. And I wouldn't want to say that we are closing the door to that, but we weigh all of those things when making those decisions. And so it just needs to be the right fit for the tribe and for our community.
Thanks, Lindsay. We have one last question here, and we might have time for another one if it comes in. But the last question currently is, and this is a kind of an open question for the audience or for the panels. Energy storage, new battery technologies, and/or the utilization of hydro storage are developments on that front. And when I think about this question, it's probably solely a question for Lenny at the utility. Are developments on that front changing the way you see the future for your operations?
So we've looked at battery storage, and right now for the, for what we need, it doesn't offer the opportunities that we want. It's more costly than some other alternatives, and the duration of the battery storage is not as long as we need, but the technology is certainly advancing. And so we would be certainly interested in looking at it and trying to adapt it to our needs. I think hydro and pump storage is also an opportunity. It's just making it work and finding the right locations and solving all the issues related to environmental and location and getting the power to where the load is. So a lot of challenges, but certainly that's the key to making solar and wind effective for future use.
This is Josie. I can speak to that a little bit as well. One of our communities is Cordova, Alaska, and they traditionally relied heavily on diesel. They moved into hydro, and we're still having a lot of times of the year where their energy would spike that they would have to rely more on diesel. So they actually worked with the Department of Energy, and they implemented as part of their grid a battery backup program, and they've seen tremendous amount of success with that program to kind of even out those spikes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that area.
Great, thanks, Josie. So with that,
just one comment. I think I agree with what Josie said. I think the challenge is it's where you are and what your energy costs are to begin with, what makes whether it makes a project worthwhile or not. Here in Arizona, our energy costs are very low, and whereas up Alaska or other places where the costs are extremely high, options that don't work here will certainly work there. You just have to do your studies and analysis to determine whether it's going to work or not.
Thanks, Lenny. Very true. With that, we do not have any more questions. I want to thank all of our presenters again for their time and excellent presentations today. What a bunch of cool projects you guys shared with our audience, and we appreciate that. To our audience, we are very interested in your suggestions on how to increase the value of these webinars, so please send us any feedback that you have. Today's webinar concluded our 2020 webinar series. However, we have begun preparing for the 2021 series, so keep an eye out for details on that early in the new year. Thanks to everyone again for your interest and attendance today, and we look forward to you joining us on future webinars. This concludes the webinar for today. Good day. Thank you.